Mr. Warden.
Yes, Your Honor.
Do you wish to cross-examine?
I do, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Hobson, good evening almost.
Good evening.
Ms. Hobson, you're here to tell the truth this afternoon. Is that correct?
That's right.
And I'm sure you have. Isn't that true?
Yes.
In fact, today you're testifying under a grant of immunity. Is that true?
Yes.
And you were asked about that by the government under direct examination, right?
Yes.
And that grant of immunity means that you cannot be prosecuted based on your testimony for anything you say today unless you lie, right?
That's right.
That's why you're telling the truth, right?
Well, I'm telling the truth.
By the way, the people who make the decision to charge you with perjury or not, the people who make the decision as to whether or not you have lied on the stand against my client, the people who make the decision with regard to any fate you may suffer after this are seated at the government's table, correct?
Well, somebody in the government would make that decision.
Right.
I think it's the government lawyer.
Excuse me?
I think it's the government lawyer.
Right. And as a result of your testimony here today, you don't face any jail time at all for your actions in this incident, right?
Right.
And you know, do you not, were you to be charged, as my client is charged, as you are named as a co-conspirator in this case, were you to be charged and convicted for these crimes, you would be facing 20 years in jail. Isn't that right?
I'm not sure how much I could really be facing, but I know that that's the penalty.
20 years, right?
Yes.
You have a lawyer representing you, right?
Yes.
He's advised you in this case, correct?
Yes.
I can't hear you. You have
Yes.
to say yes. Thank you. In fact, he negotiated this immunity deal for you, did he not?
Yes.
This immunity deal which precludes 1 night in jail for your actions, right?
What do you mean by precludes?
You will never, ever spend a night in jail for your activities on October 17th, 1996, correct?
That's right.
Your activities in which you engaged in a conspiracy to distribute 1/2 pound of cocaine, right?
You see, I didn't think at the time that it was a conspiracy.
Well, you agreed to help William Howell in his efforts to distribute 1/2 pound of cocaine on that evening, did you not? Yes or no?
I got the cocaine that was in my house.
And do you have any other impression of getting the cocaine in your house other than that was helping William Howell in his efforts to distribute 1/2 pound?
I guess not. I didn't really think about it so much at the time.
Well, were you on drugs that evening?
We did some cocaine later in the night.
Well, prior to doing the rock cocaine, that's what you did later in the night, right?
That's right.
That was your testimony, right?
Yes.
What is rock cocaine, by the way?
Well, it's the hard, kind of the really kind of intense part of the cocaine that's all solidified.
I see. And how do you utilize rock cocaine?
Well, you snort it.
And how do you snort a rock of cocaine?
Well, you have to you just kind of have to break it up and then you lay it out in a line and snort it.
And that's different from powdered cocaine? Is that right?
Well, it's stronger.
Okay. And what about crack cocaine?
I don't do crack.
But you're familiar with
crack.
crack?
I didn't do crack.
You're familiar with crack cocaine, right?
I know what it is.
You're very familiar with cocaine because you've sold it on at least 20 occasions for William Howell alone. Isn't that right?
Yes. I'm not proud of it, but that's something that I used to do.
Move to strike as unresponsive. The second part of her answer, Your Honor.
That she's not proud of it?
Yeah.
The jury would disregard the fact that she's not proud of it.
Now, by the way, you know what 1/2 pound of cocaine looks like, right?
Yes.
Doesn't look like 3 ounces of cocaine. Fair to say?
Well, it looks like a lot more.
And you initially met my client in Newtown, the Newtown area of New City. Is that right?
That's right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's about a 10-minute walk from my client's house, right?
Right.
Now, that day, and you live about a half an hour drive away from
Right.
my client? Is that right?
Yes.
Now, that day, you were, according to you, going to meet my client for an evening out on the town. Is that right?
He called me for a date.
Excuse me?
He called me for a date.
That's your testimony, right?
That's what he did?
Now, you didn't call him.
No.
In any event, you met him in Newtown after having a conversation with him, according to you, to go out on a date that evening, right?
Yes.
And you had spent the entire day at home, correct?
Yes.
Not working, right?
Right.
In fact, you were unemployed at that time, right?
Right.
You hadn't been employed for at least the previous week. Is that correct?
Right.
And the employment that you had was as a floor girl at some store. Is that right?
Yes.
And that terminated. You were laid off about a week earlier.
Yes.
A week before, we're talking about October 17th, 1996, right?
Right.
And that employment was only temporary anyway, right?
Right.
Now, how long had you been working there?
I can't remember. I think it was just maybe about a month or so.
And prior to that employment, when were you employed previous to that?
I was just picking up temp work, so I think it was maybe a few weeks or so before that.
So you hadn't been earning a lot of money, had you?
No, it was kind of a bad time.
And this bad time, it's fair to say that on October 17th, you hadn't worked for a week. You were in need of money, weren't you?
Well, I didn't have a lot of expenses, and I tried to not need a lot of expenses, but
It was a bad time for you, right?
I wasn't doing that great.
And other times when you weren't doing that great, you had occasion to go out and sell cocaine for William Howell. Yes or no?
I did sell cocaine for William Howell.
On at least 20 occasions previous to October 17th, correct?
Right.
And in fact, you had sold cocaine only a couple of days before October 17th, 1996, correct?
Yes.
And that wasn't for Fred Peters, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Have you ever spent a night in jail at all?
No, I haven't.
What about for your conviction 2 years ago on that marijuana charge? Did you spend an evening in jail then?
Well, I spent some hours in jail after I was booked.
Okay. Would you agree with me that even those hours in jail, it's a pretty horrendous experience, isn't it?
Yeah, it was awful.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine spending 20 years in jail? Have that gone through your mind at all, Miss Hobson?
I try not to think about it.
But you did think about it, didn't you, Miss Hobson?
Well, when my lawyer told me what I could be facing, it was pretty scary.
Now, 2 years ago, when you were convicted for drug possession, that was an arrest on the street, correct?
It was 4 years ago.
4 years ago, when you were convicted of drug possession, that was while you were out on the street, right?
Well, I don't know what you mean by on the street, but yeah, I was arrested outside.
On the street somewhere, right?
Right.
And the drugs, they were in your pocketbook or something like that?
Yes.
They were concealed, correct?
Well, no, they weren't really. They were in my bag. Right.
Well,
But it was-
until the police opened up the bag, they couldn't see it, right?
Sir, I'm not going to walk around carrying marijuana like this.
Move to strike is unresponsive. Question is, could they see it before they opened up the pocketbook or the bag?
No, it was whether or not it was concealed. I'm not going to strike it.
Prior to opening up and looking inside the bag, could the marijuana be seen? Yes or no?
No.
But you were arrested and stopped and seized by the police before they saw the marijuana in the bag, right?
Right.
And by the way, you were going through tough times then as well, right?
I'm not proud of my past. I'm in recovery now, and that's all behind me, but I was doing some drugs at that time.
Well, the reason why you were stopped on the street last night is because you were walking the streets as a prostitute trying to earn money. Isn't that a fact?
You mean back in...
When you were
years?
arrested and charged with the marijuana possession, what you were doing, the reason why they stopped you, Miss Hobson, was because you were a hooker on the street that night, right?
Yes.
And you did that to earn money as well, right?
Yes.
Prior to coming here today, did you review your testimony with the prosecutors, the lawyers, the government lawyers in this case?
Did I review my testimony?
Yes.
What I was going to say today?
Yeah, they talked with you about what you were going to be asked,
Yes.
what kind of answers you were going to give, right?
Yes.
They told you perhaps what their best guess was about what the cross-examination was going to be like, right?
Yes.
They tried to get you ready for this today, right?
Yes.
And you had at least 4 meetings. Which one? You testified at a prior proceeding December 17th, just last month, correct?
Yes, I did.
And prior to that, the matter which you were testifying about is exactly the same as what you're talking about today, right?
Right.
And prior to giving testimony on that date, and that was sworn under oath, right?
Yes, it was.
Right. You were prepared by the prosecutors in about 4 sessions for your testimony, right?
Excuse me. Yes, I met with the same lawyer.
Right. And you met with Agent Luco, too, right?
Right.
The agent who just left the room and was sitting at the table with the government lawyer earlier, right? And prior to coming here today and testifying, you had additional meetings with the government to prepare you for your testimony, right?
Well, we met and talked about what I would say.
Well, were you having a coffee clutch with him, Ms. Hobson, or were you talking about how you were going to testify in court today?
They told me to tell the truth, and that's what I told.
Is that all that went on?
Well, we went over questions and answers.
Would you call that your testimony, Ms. Hobson?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Hobson, at about 16 years old, is it fair to say you started becoming a heavy drug user? Is that right?
I started using drugs then.
Would you not describe it as a heavy drug user?
It wasn't heavy in the beginning.
In the beginning?
Right.
It grew to be a large use, correct?
Yes.
And you used marijuana repeatedly, right?
Yes.
You used hallucinogens repeatedly, right?
Yes.
By that we mean things like LSD,
Right.
PCP.
Yes.
Call that angel dust on the street, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to answer yes or no, or the court stenographer can't take it down.
Yes.
You used the amphetamines illegally, right?
Yes.
You used cocaine illegally, right?
Yes, I did.
And this is over the last 6 years. You're now 22 years old, right?
Right.
Is there any drug that you wouldn't do?
Objection.
No, overruled. You can answer that.
Irrelevant to that.
You can answer that.
I never did heroin.
Would you have if you had the opportunity?
I don't think I would have, no.
You don't even know that. Now, every time, you know that possessing marijuana, you were convicted of it, is a crime, right?
Yes.
And you certainly know that possessing the hallucinogens, PCP, LSD, those are crimes, right?
Yes.
And you know that possessing these illegal amphetamines was a crime, right?
Yes.
And you know that possessing cocaine is a crime, right?
Yes.
But for that single arrest and conviction when you were hooking on the streets for marijuana, you never, prior to October 17th, you never were arrested for any of those times that you possessed those illegal drugs, right?
That's right.
Fair to say that for the last 6 years, you've repeatedly been able to beat the system any time you possess drugs except for that marijuana arrest?
Yes.
And in fact, you beat the system here today as well, right?
I just told the truth today, sir.
You committed a crime on October 17th for which you could go to jail if you were convicted of it for 20 years. Yes or no?
Yes.
You're not spending a single hour in jail for that crime. Yes or no?
No, I'm not.
You beat the system again, didn't you?
Well, the government said it was important for me to say what happened because they wanted Buddy.
And you're the only person who can give him Buddy, right? Right?
There's other people who testified too, the agents.
You know that?
Yes.
And you know what they said?
Well, I wasn't here for their testimony.
So you don't know whether they could give him Buddy at all, right?
I don't know.
In fact, Buddy is my client's nickname, according to you, right?
It is his nickname.
Right. And when you were speaking to the agents in this case, with John, after you started cooperating with the government in this case, you told them everything you know about this case, right?
Right.
One of the things you told them is that my client's nickname is Buddy, right?
Right.
And that was after your arrest and release on October 17th, correct?
Right.
By the way, you were arrested on October 17th, right?
Yes, I was.
And you told the government at that time you had nothing to do with this, you know nothing, you know from nothing, you're an innocent little girl, and they let you go the next morning, right?
Well, that's not how I put it. I felt like I wasn't involved, I wasn't a criminal, and that I didn't know what was going on that night.
You told them you didn't know anything about a cocaine deal that night, didn't you?
Right.
That was a lie, right? You knew about it.
Well, yes.
You told them you had nothing to do with a cocaine transaction that night. Isn't that a fact?
I felt like, at that time, I felt like I didn't have anything to do with it.
You dealt cocaine at least 20 times for William Howell, right?
Yes.
And that night, according to your testimony, you went to your house, got the cocaine in your house, gave it to William Howell, went back with William Howell to Peter's house, watched them sift, divide, you hid it in your bra, watched them sift, divide, and put the cocaine together.
Is there a question here?
I'm leading up to it, Judge.
Let him finish.
So far, this is all your testimony, right?
Right.
Okay. You watched them hit it with lactose, right?
Yes.
And you felt you had not, and then you traveled to Lyle to deliver the drugs so that William could deliver the drugs, and you felt you had nothing to do with this on October 17th?
Well, I felt it was Buddy's thing.
You felt it was Buddy? I'm leading up
Let
to
him
it, Judge.
finish.
So far, this is all your testimony, right?
Right.
Okay. You watched them hit it with lactose, right?
Yes.
And you felt you had not, and then you traveled to Lyle to deliver the drugs so that William could deliver the drugs, and you felt you had nothing to do with this on October 17th?
Well, I felt it was Buddy's thing.
You felt it was Buddy's thing?
Mm-hmm.
What about William's thing?
And William's thing.
But not your thing.
Right.
And that's what you told him, right?
Well, that's how I felt that night. Right.
You started changing your tune after your lawyer told you, hey, they think you're involved, the government, you're going to go to jail for 20 years, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I just didn't know about conspiracy before.
You knew about dealing drugs, didn't you, before?
Yes.
You knew that it was illegal to possess cocaine before, right?
Right.
You knew that your possession of the cocaine in your house that night was illegal, right?
Right.
You knew that giving it to someone else so he could sell it to someone else was illegal, right?
Right.
So forgetting about the word conspiracy that you seem to have a problem with, Miss Hobson, you knew everything you did with the cocaine in your house that night, giving it to Howell, was illegal, right?
Right.
And you knew on October 17th, before you were arrested, you were committing a crime helping William Howell to distribute cocaine, yes or no?
Yes.
And your testimony here today is you felt you did nothing wrong until you were advised by your lawyer of the law of conspiracy? Is that your testimony?
I felt like I was kind of along for the ride that night. I didn't feel like I was involved with it. I didn't know where the cocaine was going, who was buying it.
So it didn't matter.
Well, I wasn't going to get anything out of it.
By the way, those 20 times that you sold cocaine for William Howell, you were never arrested, right?
Right.
Kept beating the system then, too, didn't you?
Well, I didn't get caught.
Is there a problem with my phraseology that you beat the system, Miss Hobson?
It makes me sound kind of crummy.
No.
It's just embarrassing, the way you say that.
It's embarrassing to tell this jury that you sold cocaine 28 times in the past?
No, that's part of me. That's history.
Do you need a drink of water, Miss Hobson?
No.
And by the way, what does this mean to hit it with lactose? I heard that phrase from you earlier. What does that mean?
Well, it makes it smoother and finer to sift it.
What?
The cocaine.
How do you do that? How does one hit something with lactose?
Well, you just mix it like you're mixing flour with baking powder or something. You just spread it around and stir it around.
And is that something that's ordinarily done with cocaine?
I think so, yes.
And, well, Ms. Hobson, why is that done? Do you know?
Well, it makes it smoother, and also there's more of it, too.
It cuts the purity, right?
Right.
Because pure cocaine could be lethal, isn't that right?
That's right.
So when you sell cocaine, first it's hit with lactose, isn't it?
Yes.
And that's done regularly, right?
Yes.
So it's not something you're unfamiliar with, is it, Ms. Hobson?
That I'm not familiar with? No,
Yeah,
I'm familiar with it.
Okay. Now, you first met William Howell 3 years ago, correct?
Yes.
And that's while you were still living with Mr. Peters, is that correct?
That's right.
And you began dating Mr. Howell, did you not? At about that time, right?
After I broke up with Buddy.
You began dating Mr. Howell at about the same time you broke up with Buddy, is
A little
that right?
afterwards, right?
And you had a romantic relationship with Mr. Howell, correct?
Kind of on and off again.
Continued for the up until October 17th, 96, didn't it?
Right.
And you sold drugs for Mr. Howell, right?
Yes.
Now, oh, by the way, you met Mr. Howell 3 years ago through neighbors, correct?
Yes.
You were introduced to Mr. Howell by Mr. Peters, correct?
No, I wasn't.
Now, on October 17th, you have plans, so you say, to go out on a date with Mr. Peters that evening, correct?
Right. He called me up kind of out of the blue. Yeah.
And you hadn't seen him for quite a while, correct?
Right.
Months, would you say?
Yes.
And having not seen Mr. Peters for months and making plans to see him that evening, you meet him in Newtown, right?
Right.
And in meeting him at Newtown, withdrawn, prior to leaving your home to go meet Mr. Peters, a man you haven't seen in several months, to go out with him, you don't get dressed for that evening out, right?
Right.
You bring your clothes with you.
Well, I figured we were...
Is that right, yes or no?
Yes. Yes.
And those clothes, you had plans that you were going to go to this man's house, a person you hadn't seen in several months, and that's where you were going to go get changed and ready for the evening out with him, correct?
That's right.
By the way, did you ever tell a lie under oath, even a small lie?
No.
Remember testifying last December under oath about whether or not you were employed on October 17, 1996?
I remember testifying, yeah.
And when you first testified, it was much like today. The government lawyer asked you questions in quite a different manner than I'm asking you now. Wouldn't you agree, Ms.
Yes.
Hudson? A bit more friendly, wouldn't you agree?
Well, he just asked me questions that I could just say the answers to. He wasn't, like, putting words in my mouth and stuff.
Am I putting words in your mouth, Ms. Hobson?
Well, not really, but...
Is there anything about your testimony right now that you're given by way of answer that you want to change?
Not that I can think of.
Have you lied with respect to any answer you've given according to my questions today?
No.
Okay. But when the government lawyer was asking you questions on October 7th, withdrawn, December 17th, 1996, the first words that popped out of your mouth with respect to whether you were working on October 17th, only a month earlier, were that you were working, correct?
I was confused right then.
Well, the question was, were you employed on October 17th, right?
Right.
And what about that question in particular confused you?
Well, I was just so nervous about testifying, and I had been working right before that, so I thought that that's what he was asking me about.
So when he asked you, by the way, you know the critical date here in court is October 17th, 1996, right?
Right.
That's the date when this whole drug deal went down, right?
Well, it didn't go down, but that's the day that they got busted for.
Right?
Right.
Right. And it was in your mind when you were asked whether you were working on the critical date in this case that question related to some time before?
No, what I really thought was that he was asking me if I was working then, and I was working then, and I am working now, at the time of the trial.
You were fired. You were laid off a week earlier, right?
From that job, right.
You weren't working on October 17th, right?
Right.
The question was very clear, understandable, and said, are you working on October 17th? Were you working on October 17th? Right, yes or no?
That was the question, but in my mind I heard it that, are you working now? I thought that's what he was going to ask me, are you working now?
Is there anything else that you're confused about today, Ms. Hobson?
I'm not confused.
Now, you met Mr. Peters. Your best guess is sometime between 4 o'clock in the afternoon and 7 o'clock at night. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And you had drinks in Newtown for about a half an hour to 45 minutes, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then you walked back to Mr. Peters' apartment, which takes about 10 minutes, correct?
Right.
So is it fair to say that the earliest time you would have arrived at my client's house would be 4 o'clock in Newtown, a half an hour for drinks would make it 4:30, 10 minutes, walk back to Mr. Peters' house. You could be there as early as 4:40 in the afternoon, correct? On October 17th, right?
Yeah.
And, or as late as 7 p.m. arrival in Newtown, right?
Yes.
45 minutes for drinks is 7:45, right? Fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
10 minutes walking back to Mr. Peters' house, 8:55 in the evening, correct?
Yeah, I don't think it was that late.
Well, do you want to change your testimony?
No.
Okay.
No. Maybe it was that late.
Well, this is testimony that you reviewed on 8 to 10 occasions with the government, asking you these same questions about what time these meetings took place, right?
That's not the testimony. He is assuming questions he's assuming facts in his questions that have not been put before the court.
How many times did you meet with the government to discuss your testimony prior to today?
At least a couple times.
Your Honor, if I may, that was not what I had issue with. There's been no testimony as to what was discussed during those times. We're not disputing that she met on 4 occasions.
I assume this is outside the hearing of the witness, right, Judge?
No.
I object to this. I'd like a sidebar.
Okay.
Witness is in court.
Well, now it's sidebar.
My objection was, his question is, you discussed that. He is assuming in the question that she discussed the testimony she's giving now during her meetings with the government, and that has not been testified to.
He has asked her the number of times
Correct.
they discussed the testimony.
Correct.
If you, in fact, feel that that's misleading the jury, when he's done with his cross-examination, you can get up and clarify that on redirect. But your objection is overruled. You may continue your examination.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'll rephrase the question, Judge. I'll withdraw it and rephrase it. You met with the prosecutors prior to today at least 4 times to discuss your testimony, as we already talked about, in December, right?
Yes.
And 3 or 4 times again this week, right?
Yes.
That's about 8 times or so, right?
Well, I guess.
Yeah. And one of the things they were discussing was the timing of events here, correct?
Yes.
And they were discussing, so what time did you meet Fred Peters in Newtown, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You have to use words like this.
Yes.
Okay. And you told them, as you have today, sometime between 4 and 7 p.m., right?
Yes.
Okay. So getting back to the 7 o'clock date that you met him in Newtown, you got 45 minutes for drinks. That's 7:45. 10 minutes to walk back to Mr. Peters' house puts you at 7:55 p.m. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. So you could have been, according to your recollection, at Mr. Peters' house as early as 4:40 in the afternoon or as late as 7:55 in the evening. Isn't that fair to say, Ms. Hobson?
Yes.
And then, half an hour later or so, William Howell arrives, right?
Yes.
Using the times we just suggested, by the way, 4:45, 7:55, 4:40, I'm sorry, 4:40, half an hour would be 10 after 5, right? Mr. Howell arrives, right?
Yes.
Or sometime after 7:55 p.m., right?
Right.
Okay. And Mr. Howell arrives at the house, and you are with Mr. Howell continuously until you are arrested at 2:30 in the morning. That's correct. Yes or no?
Yes. Well, when we went to my house, I went in my room by myself, and he was in the other room.
Well, he didn't take a drive while you were in your house, right?
No, he was in my house.
Okay.
Right.
So he was present in the same location. as you,
Right, but I'm trying to
trying to clarify for the jury, right?
And I'm trying to say the truth,
Oh.
and you said I had been in his presence the whole time, and I hadn't.
Okay. You and Mr. Howell had been in the same location, whether it been had been Mr. Peters' home, Mr. Howell's car, your home, or the arrest location, continuously from as early as 10 after 5 in the evening until you were arrested at 2:30 that next morning. Is that right?
That's almost right. I don't mean to argue, but when we got into Lyle, William Howell was left, and then it was just me and Buddy in the car.
Fine. I'll say it again. I thank you for your clarity, Miss Hobson.
I'm trying.
That's not a question.
Ask a question.
From 5:10 in the evening until the time you arrived in Lyle and William Howell went out to deliver the cocaine, Mr. Howell and you were together. Is that true?
Yes.
Mr. Howell never went to deliver cocaine at 8:30 in the evening, right? Without you, right?
No.
On October 17th, we're talking about. You understand that, right?
Right.
And by the way, the only phone call that you ever are aware of taking place during those hours, 10 after 5 in the evening until 2:15 in the morning, is a phone call between, according to you, Mr. Peters in his home and someone else at the other end of the line. Is that right?
That's right.
You never, ever saw Mr. Howell make a phone call that night, right?
Right.
Didn't make phone calls from anybody? Withdrawn. He never made a phone call from your house, right?
No, I don't think so.
Well, your testimony in December, under oath, was that, in fact, he never made a phone call from your house. Yes or no?
Right.
Were you telling the truth in December?
Yes, yes.
And what you learned was that a half a pound of cocaine was needed while at Mr. Peters' house, and you endeavored to go get some cocaine and help them out, right?
Right.
And according to you, the person who asked you to get this cocaine was Mr. Peters because he had given it to you earlier, right?
That's right.
Isn't it a fact that the person who gave you cocaine, the reason you had cocaine in your house was because you were a dealer for William Howell? Isn't that true? Yes or no?
I never called myself a dealer for him.
Mr. Howell supplied you with drugs to sell, didn't he? Yes or no?
Yes.
And the reason you had cocaine in the house was because Mr. Howell gave you that cocaine, not Mr. Peters, right?
No, it was Buddy.
And, by the way, up until October 17th, 1996, how much cocaine were you personally using a day?
Well, some days I didn't use it, and some days it depended on...
How much would you go through a week on average? Can you figure that out, Miss Hobson?
I don't know. It really did vary a lot.
Give me the broadest possible spectrum, Miss Hobson.
It's really hard to say how much. Sometimes it was really dry and I didn't have any. And sometimes I did as much as.
Well, let me ask you this, okay. Did you do as much as you had at the moment?
No, because, as you know, there was some in my house that night that I hadn't done.
Well, how long had that been in your house that you hadn't done it for?
A couple days.
Okay, so you had received it only a couple days earlier, right?
Right.
By the way, you didn't arrive back after picking up the cocaine at your home, sticking in your bra and traveling with Mr. Howell. You didn't arrive back at Mr. Peters' house until 11:30 that night, correct?
Right.
Now, by the way, when you were at your house with Mr. Howell, which one? When you went from Mr. Peters' house to your house to get the cocaine, did you talk with Mr. Howell about this cocaine deal at all?
No.
Not a word, in fact, right?
No.
That's your testimony, right?
Right.
That was your testimony in December at any rate, right?
Right.
You're sticking by it, right?
It's the truth.
Okay. And when you went into the house, you didn't discuss a cocaine deal with Mr. Howell at all, right?
No, I just went to go get it.
And what you did when you went into your house was you gave him a beer, put an album on the record player. Is that what you did?
Yes.
You still have albums and record players, Miss Hobson?
We were listening to some oldies.
And that was it. You didn't have any other romantic interlude with Mr. Howell,
No.
right? Okay. And you got there as early as 5:25 in the evening, isn't that fair?
I just don't think it was quite that early, but...
Maybe 6 o'clock?
Right, maybe around there.
And you didn't arrive back at Mr. Peters' house until 11:30 that night, right?
Right.
And all you did in your house, which one? Was the only thing you did in that house that evening was you gave him a beer, you listened to a record, and you got the cocaine, put it in your bra, right?
Right.
And you had no discussions about cocaine, right?
No, just going to get it. I said I'm going to go get it. And
Right. And you didn't make any deliveries of cocaine with Mr. Howell, right?
No.
And Mr. Howell never left you to make any deliveries of cocaine, right?
No.
And you were together with him the whole time, correct?
Yes.
And he made no phone calls from your house about deliveries of cocaine, correct?
No.
Excuse me. Now, by the way, when you got back to Mr. Peters' house, I take it he is an album listener too, right?
We
You
like
find
old...
that funny, Miss Hobson?
No, I don't, but just the way you said it.
He still listens to albums as well, right?
We like oldies. It's like a thing we have in
all
common.
three of you, right? And that's where the sifting and the mixing of this half pound of cocaine went down, right?
Well, it's a good surface because of the size of it. Nice and flat.
And Mr. Peters, luckily enough, happened to have an album there, an album cover there, to sift and mix the cocaine on, right?
Yes.
And you mixed half a pound of cocaine, right?
They did the mixing.
Excuse me. Excuse me. And after you mixed, sifted, whatever, this was after 11:30 at night, right?
Right.
It was all gathered together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you all went in Mr. Howell's car, correct?
Yes.
And you drove straight to Lyle, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Howell got out of the car with a half a pound of cocaine, right?
Yes.
And you were all arrested, correct?
Right.
With your indulgence, Your Honor, 1 minute.
That's all you're going to get.
I appreciate that. By the way, your relationship with Mr. Peters broke up about 2 years ago or so, right?
That's right.
And during that time, he used to beat you, correct?
At the end, yes.
Yeah. And I take it that's the reason for the breakup. Is that right?
Yes.
In fact, you had him arrested for one of those, right?
Yes.
You also dropped all the charges in that, correct?
Well, I didn't want to go through with it.
Right. And because going through with it would have been difficult for you to proceed with the system, right?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Through the system, to proceed through the system against him criminally would have been difficult for you. Trying experience. Do you understand what that means, Ms. Hobson?
It would have been hard, but I just felt like it was over with him and me, and I didn't want anything to do with it.
You did bear resentment towards him, though, for those beatings, didn't you?
I was mad at him, yes.
Excuse me?
I was mad at him then.
And you got over it?
Yes. I went on a date with him the other night.
Excuse me?
I went on a date with him in October, so I was over it.
So you say. The date that you didn't get dressed for after not seeing him for several months, correct? That one. Is that the one we're
It wasn't
talking
like I
about?
didn't get dressed. I brought clothes to change into.
Now, you sold cocaine in spite of knowing it's illegal, right? Many times, right?
Yes.
You possessed all these illegal drugs in spite of knowing it's illegal all these times, right?
Yes.
You've avoided jail time on each and every occasion that you've ever committed a crime, correct?
Yes.
And by the way, those commissions of crimes must number in the hundreds? Yes or no?
Well, if you're talking about possession even being a crime, I guess.
Yeah. Possessing cocaine is no big deal, right, Ms.
No,
Humphrey?
I know it is a crime. I know. So it probably, yes, hundreds of times, I guess.
and the
I'm not
hallucination-
proud of it. I said that before.
All right. What about the selling of the cocaine the 20 times? That's a little more serious than the...
I know, but you're trying
possession.
to make me into looking like a bad person, and I'm not a bad
And
person.
you're
That's,
truly an angel, right, Ms.
no,
Humphrey?
I'm not an angel, but that was part of my past.
And that's over now, right?
That's right.
Because you got the grace of God stuck on you by the government here, and you'll never see a minute in jail, right? Yes or no?
I don't know about the grace of God, but I'm not going to see.
When you were selling the cocaine on the streets those times, were you a discriminating seller? You know what I mean by that?
No.
Right. You needed money when you sold the cocaine, right? Yes or no?
Yes, either money or cocaine.
Excuse me?
Either money or cocaine.
Well, you were in it for the profit, whether drugs or money, correct?
Yes.
And you didn't care particularly, did you, who you sold it to, did you?
Well, I was careful.
When you say careful, do you mean you were careful not to sell it to a police officer so you wouldn't get arrested? That's what you mean, right?
Right.
Other than that, you got the money, you get cocaine, right?
Right.
You didn't evaluate the person as to whether or not it was a woman or a man, right?
No.
Right. You didn't evaluate the person as to whether or not it was a pregnant woman, did you?
No.
You didn't care, right?
Well, if they wanted it, they could get it.
Right. Now, would you agree with me, and I guess you would because you're sort of embarrassed about it, that that was pretty horrendous on your part?
Well, I think that they probably could have got it from other people if it wasn't me.
Does that make it okay, Miss Hobson? Or do you think it was pretty horrendous that you were out there selling cocaine, perhaps to pregnant women?
I don't think I ever sold to a pregnant woman.
You didn't care, did you, Miss Hobson? Did you care?
If someone was pregnant and smoking and doing cocaine?
You didn't ask them, did you, Miss Hobson?
No.
What do you think is worse, Miss Hobson? Telling a lie or what you did in the past?
Objection.
Sustained.
Would you lie here in court today to save your own skin, Miss Hobson, 20
No.
years in jail?
No.
No. In other words, if my client was innocent, you would face the 20 years in jail. Is that true?
Yes.
Because lying would be just something your moral fiber couldn't take. Is that right?
I wouldn't lie.
Because it's a really bad thing to do, right, Miss Hobson?
Well, it is.
No further questions.